Autofocus systems are complex. Between the what, the where, and the how that the camera has to deal with on what it needs to know to focus on, there are a ton of different variables and settings that you need to be able to control to make the camera do what it needs to do. Now, one of those variables or settings is how the autofocus system deals with subject motion. That is your subject moving or is it stationary? And consequently, how the camera should optimize for focusing in those different cases. Now, Canon calls this setting AF operation, though if you're familiar with another brand's cameras, you will likely recognize this as the focus or AF mode. Now, as usual, a quick disclaimer applies to this. The settings that I'm going to be talking about in this video are not specific to just the EOS R5 Mark II. They appear on Canon's other cameras. And in fact, all three of these settings that we'll be looking at can be found on cameras going back as far as Canon's EOS D30 from 2000, or even film cameras prior to that. However, the tests and demonstrations that I'm going to be showing of these functions that are in this video were done using a Canon EOS R5 Mark II and reflect that camera's menus, controls, and most importantly, performance. If you are using another model Canon camera, you may find that the settings, performance, and menus for all of these things may differ or be located in different places or simply might not be available depending on your specific camera. As always, you could check the manual for the details. Now, for still shooting, there are 3 AF operation modes available on the R5 Mark II. Now, if you're new to Canon's platform, manual focus is not part of the AF operation setting, even though the camera displays that manual focus is active in the same place it displays the AF operation mode everywhere. So instead of using AF operation, when you want to switch between manual and autofocus, this is done with either a switch on your lens, that's the AF-MF switch, a physical switch on some crop or APS-C mount bodies, such as the R10 and R7, or through an entry in the camera's menus, such as on the R100 or R50. That said, let's talk about the 3 different AF operation modes that are available. These are one-shot, AI focus, and servo. However, the situation isn't as simple as it might seem at first glance. The AF operation setting also affects how other camera functions, including how many of the autofocus areas as well as the camera's meter work as well. So with that said, let's talk about these modes. Now, the first AF operation mode we'll look at is one shot. Now, when in one-shot mode, the camera runs through the AF process only once until focus is achieved, and then it stops, hence the one-shot moniker. Now, the biggest user-facing consequence of this is that one shot is only useful when you're photographing static subjects. Now, under the hood, the camera is going to go through all of the normal closed-loop autofocus processing that it normally does. And when focus is achieved, that's where things get more complicated. For starters, if your camera is set to use evaluative metering, then the camera will actually use the area of the frame where the focus point is and in focus to control how that area of the frame is weighted in response or with respect to all the rest of the frame in the exposure calculations. So a brightly lit subject may not be overexposed if it's in focus and under an autofocus point. With that said, one thing to be aware of when using one-shot focusing is that it can cause the camera to change the viewfinder brightness and frame rate when the focus is happening. This happens most frequently or most visibly in dim conditions or when using a very narrow aperture, say f/16 or f/22. Since focusing only happens once, the camera is doing this so that it can do everything it possibly can to maximize focus accuracy, and that means getting as much signal to the sensor so there's as little noise interfering with focusing as possible. However, while I make that point, even this is a very complex process to parse out and understand what's going on. And that brightening is affected by many other settings on the camera, such as exposure and depth of field preview, the viewfinder frame rate, whether you have blackout-free shooting enabled or not, and even whether you're using the LCD or the EVF. Now, the flip side function to one-shot focusing is servo focusing. Now, this is arguably the preferred mode that you will want to be in anytime you're dealing with moving subjects. Under the hood, servo focusing is pretty straightforward. It simply continues to reevaluate the focus on whatever is under the focus point, and if it's not good, drive the lens towards making it good all the time, or at least as long as you have your finger on the shutter release or the AF on button. However, while that's said, what also is happening under the hood is not quite as simple as just the AF system running. Servo mode also interacts with other camera systems and does so actually differently than one-shot does. The most obvious of these interactions is with the metering system. Where the servo, or where the exposure is locked in one shot, in servo it doesn't get locked, and it can change while the camera is focusing or while you have the autofocus system active, again, holding the shutter release or the AF on button. Additionally, servo mode will change how some of the AF areas will function. Instead of just being a single point, they will switch to tracking a subject in the larger context, though getting into the details of that is really something for another video. Now, additionally, as when you are working in one-shot mode, in servo, the camera can still adjust the viewfinder's frame rate, the lens's aperture, brightness, etc., to get more accurate focusing in those really dim situations. However, in my testing and my experience as well, the camera is less likely to do this than it is to do in one-shot, and can lead to some, I won't call it inaccuracies, but potentially could be a little bit less accurate if you were shooting in very low light or with a very narrow aperture. Now, all that said, that brings me to the final AF operation mode on the camera, AI focus. Both in theory and actually in the way Canon's UI design lays this out, this function falls between one-shot and servo in how it operates. Now, AI focus isn't exactly a new feature to the EOS R5 Mark II. It's actually been included in many of Canon's cameras for years, from the lower tier EOS Rs to the mid and lower tier DSLRs, going really honestly all the way back to at least the EOS D60 from the early 2000s. However, Canon has been inconsistent, to say the least, with what cameras actually have it as a user-selectable option. For starters, it has never been an option on any of the flagship or EOS 1 series cameras, and this actually includes the R1 and R3. And while it was included in the 5D Mark IV, it disappeared, at least from being user-selectable, in its direct successor, the R5. So, what does AI focus do exactly then? Well, simply put, it combines the functions of one-shot and servo AF modes. Initially, the camera acts as if it's in one-shot mode and will focus wherever or on whatever is under the autofocus point. And when that focus is achieved, it will lock the exposure just the same way as the camera does in one shot. However, in one shot, once focus is achieved, that's it. The camera stops processing focus information. In AI focus, the camera actually continues reading out the autofocus sensor and focus error, even though it's not driving the lens and kind of isn't acting like it's doing anything. At some point, if your subject then moves enough closer or further away from the camera where focus needs to change, the camera's, because it's measuring the focus change, will determine that it actually needs to track your subject. And then it starts driving your lens again. Effectively, this means that the camera is automatically switching from one shot to servo based on what your subject is doing. Now, that said, a word of caution here. At first glance, this really might sound like it's the best of both worlds. You get one shot for the static things, it automatically transitions to servo for the dynamic things, and that sounds great. However, that's not always going to be ideal for some users. Now, for many users, at least those that don't need to either respond to very quickly moving subjects that are like moving from the start, or are shooting subjects that transition from stationary to motion very quickly, AI focus can be a very good setting to leave your camera in and use in general. Just take some of the thought away of what you need to do or how you have to think about things. You get the stability and accuracy of one shot right out of the gate for all those static situations, and the camera will transition to servo in those more dynamic situations, generally fast enough for most people to find it useful or acceptable. However, the catch here is that there is a delay before the camera transitions from the one shot to servo behavior in AI focus. And this means that if you know you are going to be shooting something that's moving from, the start, say sports or sports cars or birds in flight, or where you need to respond to dynamic shifts in action from static to motion, such as, for example, a bird taking off, then AI focus might not be for you. It simply may not be responsive enough compared to keeping the camera in Servo AF for the camera to transition from that one-shot behavior to that servo behavior when you are looking for that immediate reaction. So those are the AF operation modes. And now that we've talked about them, let's talk a little bit about how to change the AF operation mode on your camera. And interestingly, Canon gives us a ton of ways to go about doing this. To start with, the AF operation mode can be accessed and changed through the camera's menu system. Simply hit the menu button, switch to the AF1 page, look at the top, and the first entry there is going to be titled AF Operation. And from there, you can choose between one shot, AI focus, and servo. Option number 2 is to use the dial function menu. By default, you can press the camera's multifunction button, that's the MFN1 by the shutter release, to bring up this menu, and by default, the AF operation setting will be in the dial function menu in the second column from the left on the bottom. So to change it, you'll need to select it by pressing the MFN button or using the second quick control dial, that's the top one, to select that second column and then use the quick control dial on the back of the camera to change the camera's autofocus operation mode. The autofocus operation setting is also in the default quick control menu that pops up when you hit Q over your live view feed. Now to access this, as I said, you hit the quick control menu button. This is the Q with the box around it on the back of the camera, and then use either the rear dial, multi-controller, or thumbstick, or the touch interface to select it by moving the yellow cursor to there, and then by default, the one you're looking for here is going to be the second entry down or second box down from the top on the left side. Although on the R5, we can actually, or Mark II, we can actually customize this menu, so if you've moved it, it may be somewhere else. Then you can either use the main command dial, the second quick control dial, or the multi-controller's left and right function to change it. Of course, if you are using the LCD screen, you can also use the touch interface to directly select and change the AI or the autofocus operation setting as well. Finally, the setting is found on the shooting info screen number 5. That's this black one here with all the camera exposure and settings on it. It's this setting here, second in on the bottom row. And again, to change this, you press the quick control menu button and then use either the multi-controller or the touch screen to select and change the setting. So that's going through the menu. However, there is one final option that we have available to us, and that is we can directly toggle between one shot and servo modes using a customized button function action. Now, by default, this is not programmed to any of your camera's buttons, so you will have to go into the menus and set it. If you want to do this, the way to do it is to go to page 1 of the Control Customization menu, and then the Customize buttons for shooting entry. In that submenu, select the button you want to customize, then press Set. You're looking for the setting that says one shot with a arrow pointing left and right over servo. Though note, this setting will not toggle you into or out of AI focus, only between one shot and servos. So actually, if you're in AI focus and you hit this, it won't toggle you into either servo or one shot. This function is also available on the EOS R5, which doesn't have AI focus, but will one button toggle you between servo and one shot as well. That said, I hope you found this useful, or at least interesting. If you did, let me know by hitting that like button. Also, if this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Finally, if you'd like to help and support this channel, you can help us for free by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and leaving a comment with your experiences. Likewise, you can support us by hitting that thanks button or buying yourself something you've always wanted from one of the affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.